Shane Jones.
Kia ora no tātou, tēnā koe, Mr Speaker. Along with my other colleagues, rise to support this bill going to the Select Committee. In 1992, Honourable Doug Kidd was the Minister of Fisheries. He identified during his tenure that aquaculture by 2010 would produce $1 billion worth of foreign exchange earnings. He then moved on and surfaced many years later as an expert guiding the current ministers in terms of how those dashed expectations of his might be achieved. And I have to say, sir, that the range of ideas that are contained in this bill most certainly should be supported to the Select Committee, and we should listen very carefully as to what ideas might come out of the Select Committee to ensure that the balance doesn't tip too far one way or the other. $370 million approximately, sir, is the current value of the aquaculture industry, the vast majority of which goes overseas. Indeed, the major mussel stakeholders are about to leave to go to China in the forlorn pursuit, I rather fear, of acting in a cohesive fashion to ensure that we don't continue the curse of so many New Zealand exporters of undercutting their neighbours. Sir, this is an opportunity for us to redress what has been a spectacular episode of non-activity, and indeed in the minds of Māori marine farming enterprise owners, a spectacular failure that goes back to key decisions that were taken by ministers over the last 3 or 4 years. In an attempt to respond to the Klondike effect, sir, where people were screaming around the country, actually camping on coastal real estate and not having either the capital or the connections, sir, to ever develop that space, we unwittingly created in those days a speculative rush. And then when you had communities, sir, who probably had the ability to leverage their other assets and put capital into aquaculture, they found they were being charged extortionate fees to take a secondary stake in this coastal space that had already been locked up by a range of entrepreneurial characters, and as I've said, who knew not a thing about exporting and who lacked the ability to amass the necessary elements to create any enterprise out of it. And then our response, sir, came forward and it froze that part of the industry, i.e. new space. I have to say though, sir, new space is only part of what is needed in this industry. Like all industries, if you cannot settle upon a sustainable or maintainable export price, then it's very hard to grow or even stay solvent in this industry, as many mussel farmers, oyster farmers and others will tell you, which is why, sir, this industry is seeing critical mass dynamics at work. Now that's more a statement on the industry, sir, as opposed to this piece of legislation, but it's important, sir, that we have a very good understanding as to what really are the problems that we're trying to solve here. Now, obviously, in a simplistic way, too much red tape or complex and costly planning provisions is a key issue that both sides, certainly both major parties, have deep concerns about, sir. And if this bill can simplify that, then we may see some fresh investment. But we won't see fresh investment, sir, unless we can see sunlight in the marketplace, i.e. the export markets. And that raises questions as to how well organised aquaculture exporters are, what level of collaboration there is amongst them, and to what extent can they work together without falling afoul of the law, of perhaps using practices that might raise the ire or cause the attention of regulators to be directed towards their activities. Sir, in addition to that, there's always been a funding problem since the last 5 or 6 years, once the AMA model was brought into law, i.e. areas would be created as aquaculture management areas, and within those areas punters who actually wanted to create a business there could make an application. So those AMAs were never going to be created without central government funding. And to date, none of the big parties have showed much zest for spending the millions of dollars necessary for AMAs to be created. And in addition to that, sir, when an AMA is created, the costs facing an investor are inordinately larger than the costs facing an opponent. The opponents, sir, are able to use the fruits of social democracy being married with resource management and bring their concerns to the table and actually require an exhaustive consideration of things that are both relevant and irrelevant. And if you're an investor wanting to enlarge your enterprise, sir, you face those considerable hurdles. But that in itself, sir, can be traced back to the inability of regional government to fund it. And also, I'm told by them, sir, the inability of the ratepayers, which stand behind regional government, to actually put serious dough on the table to allow them to determine which areas under their planned environmental management strategies are going to be dedicated. And if you were, sir, to go for a private plan change, then that in itself was a very expensive exercise. So this is relevant to Māori, and I suppose the jury is still out, sir, as to how will the Māori entitlement be settled flowing from the deal that was done in the time of, I think it was David Benson Pope. However, how will it actually happen? Will it be cash? If there's no AMAs, how will they actually be allocated their space? Now, the fact that the obligation upon the Crown is clearly reflected, and I think it's section 53, there is the ability to take different routes forward. So we look forward to hearing what both the industry and Māori players have to say about that. And so it's useful to think about how aquaculture can actually move into other species. At the moment, we're really into a situation where it's primarily mussels and oysters, but an area, sir, where the market is large is in finfish. I actually come, sir, from the Te Aupōuri iwi, and we unwisely invested many millions of dollars in a land-based fish farm. And the fish farm has since been discontinued. Unfortunately, the asset base was such that the assets have been able to absorb the losses which come as a consequence of dabbling in capitalism and getting Scandinavian technology and learning that the ability to enforce the contract against Scandinavians is actually proportionate to the distance that they are away, i.e. you've got to go a long way to actually get them to observe the obligations under the contract. But that's another matter. So there is a great deal of scope for the farming of finfish, and I only hope that the Minister, when he comes back to us at a later stage, indeed through the committee stages, ensures that there's scope in this bill for investors to move from one type of aquaculture species to another, depending on where the market trends are taking us in terms of our export potential over the medium to long term. Because whilst, sir, this is an important resource management issue, at the end of the day, aquaculture, sir, is about exploiting natural space, natural resources, and transforming it into jobs, enabling firms to take a risk, and generating the flow of goods and services, hopefully leading to the generation of foreign exchange earnings. That's really, sir, at a deep level what we're on about here. Whether or not the rhetoric spouted by Honourable Jerry Brownlee will ever come to pass, he has pinned a great deal of hope upon the aquaculture industry to be a new inordinately large growth industry. I have my doubts about that, but, sir, we support this bill going to the Select Committee. Kia ora.
Call Colin King.